continue on our conversation around the topic, me but free. How do we fully embrace who God is, but fully walk in the freedom that God has given each and every one of us? And so we're going to talk about that. We talked about Jonah for the first half, and now we're in the life of Moses. If you haven't been here, you can go online. You can catch up all you want. We're just going to kind of jump right in to the story of Moses where we left off last week, Pastor Jason, in chapter 3 of Exodus. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up chapter 4 of Exodus and just kind of hang out there for a second. But the question I want to ask you this morning as we just kind of to start our conversation is this, have you ever asked yourself, do I have what it takes? Like, have you ever had that moment where you look at yourself, you examine yourself, and you ask honestly, do I actually have what it takes? Maybe something has been asked of you, and you look at yourself and like, I don't even know if I can do that. Do I have what it takes? Maybe God is asking you to give something away for a bigger result, and you're looking at what you have, and you're like, is this what he's asking? This is nothing. Do I have what it takes? And you have these moments where you stare yourself in the mirror in honest moments and just ask, do I have what it takes? And this feeling can almost be immobilizing because you just start looking at all your flaws. You start looking at all you don't have. And I just want to kind of breathe a little bit of fresh air into the place. And if you've had that moment, if you had that question, just know this morning you're not alone. Like, we could do a show of hands, which we're not going to do. But I bet you everyone in this room has had that moment where it's some season of life and they question whether or not they have what it takes. I've had that moment. I've had those moments. I have those moments more than I care to admit as I look at myself and say, God, really? Me? Do I have what it takes? And this morning, we're going to jump into the story of Moses where he's asking that same question. We're jumping into the story of Moses where he's asking, God, do I have what it takes? And Moses had just encountered God in the form of a burning bush. If you haven't read that story, you can read in Exodus chapter 3. God appeared to Moses in the form of a burning bush, and then he called and commissioned him to leave the comfort of his life. Mind you, he's now been in the wilderness for about 40 years. He's got married. He has kids. He's kind of developed a life. But he needs to leave that comfort and go back to Egypt, to the most powerful man in known time, in the known world, and to ask him to let the Israelites, Moses' people, go. Now, you got to remember, the Israelites are the largest slave force in the known world, and they are responsible for building Pharaoh's elaborate kingdom. So this is no small ask. So Moses is standing there going, me? Really? Do I have what it takes? And so we pick up in his story in chapter 4, verse 1. You can follow along with me. It says, and Moses answered, but behold, Lord, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. And then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he answered, a staff. Then God said, throw it on the ground. So Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it, which most of us probably would do the same. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. Just pause. Time out. Now, I'm no reptilist. I do not handle snakes for a living. I stay away from snakes for most part of my life. I remember my dad cutting a snake in half when I lived in Nova Scotia. That was in our driveway. That has traumatized me forever. I just stay away from snakes. People who go to reptile farms and put a giant snake on their shoulders, I'm asking, what the are you doing? Like, just stay away. Okay, so I don't know much about reptiles. I don't study them. But there's one thing I know. You don't touch them. That's one thing. But if you do touch them, you never grab a snake by the tail. Ever. Like, that's just a rule. Because what happens when you grab the snake by the tail? Right? So I'm just trying to put myself in this story. Sometimes we read Scripture and we just kind of gloss over the human of it all. We just kind of read the facts. But there's so much more into that. So Moses, not only, he's fearful of the snake, right? Because he ran away. So not only is he acting in faith to pick up the snake, he's acting in greater faith to pick up the snake by the tail. Okay? So he's stepping on his faith. So he puts out his hand, and he caught it. And it became a staff in his hand. And then God said that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Now this morning I was reading this over, and I've read this story so many times. I'm sure I taught this story in Sunday school using flannel board illustrations. But I've never understood this. I always thought that the serpent, that this demonstration was to prove to Pharaoh that God is with Moses. But that's not what this says. God says to Moses says, but they will not believe me. Who's they? He's not talking about he. He's not talking about Pharaoh. He's talking about they. He's talking about the people of Israel. They won't believe me. They're not going to follow me. And then the Lord said to him, they will believe you. They're going to believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, of God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, will listen to you. I just saw this for the first moment, and I'm still processing this, so it's going to be pretty fresh, but there's probably two reasons that I can think of that it says theirs. One, Moses was one of them before. He was one of the Egyptians. He was the enemy. He grew up in Egypt, right? So he wasn't, even though he was an Israelite, he didn't live like an Israelite. He had all the blessings of Egypt. He wasn't a slave. He didn't have, so, that was the enemy. You're the traitor, right? Secondly, he just vanished for 40 years. Like, he's not even here. And now you're coming back after 40 years. You just want us to listen to you and follow you? Who are you? Right? So there's that part. But there's also the other part where the Israelites, I think the Israelites forgot who God was. I think they forgot that they served the God of Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob. And that the miracles that God did back then, he can still do today. And the freedom that God brought them, he can still bring them today. That when God rescued them in the famine, God can still rescue them today. And I think there's a moment where God needed to prove to the Israelites that Moses is, yes, speaking on their behalf, but Moses is more importantly speaking on the behalf of God. And so he had to remind the Israelites. And aren't we the same? Don't we forget? How often do we forget? That God is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the God who will allow us, on his command only, to pick up a snake from the tail and not be harmed. That's fresh. I'm still sitting on that. You can take what you want with that. So this morning, I believe God is asking each and every one of us this same question. It's a real simple question, and it's what's in your hand. Now, you may look at what's in your hand and you say, not a lot. Or not enough. But I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. I know they don't do this in movies. They tend to stay away from this. Spoiler alert, this is the end of the story, okay? And if you forget everything else I said, we're like pushing the 5-minute mark where most of you are going to start zoning out. I get that. You know, some of the men, you're going to start getting the head nod. I understand. I fight it too. I get it. But just listen to this and hear this one part, okay? What's in your hand is enough when you're in the hands of God Father. Whatever is in your hands is enough when you are in the hands of the Father. That's all I need you to remember this morning. What's in your hands is enough when you are in the hands of the Father. So as we develop this thought, there's just 3 thoughts I want to introduce to you this morning for your consideration, things that I've been asking myself and thinking about this week, and here they are. The first one is this. What we retain in our hand reveals what's in our heart. What we retain in our hand, what we hold in our hand reveals what's in our heart. And see, what's in your hand means that whatever you're in care or control of. It could be money, it could be possessions, it could be influence, skills, abilities, maybe your children. It could be anything. Whatever is in your hands. For Moses, it was his staff. And I asked myself this question, what if Moses refused to believe that God could do anything with this simple stick? What if God just looked at his stick and said, what are you talking about? It's just a stick. I've had this stick for 40 years. It's a stick. I literally found it on the dead tree in the field. Like, it's a stick. You know, what if Moses just saw that? What if he simply looked at what was and didn't allow God to show him what could be? So let's not be mistaken here. Moses was simply a man presented with a choice, an opportunity to either walk in faith and obedience or not. He's just a regular guy. Had he not looked beyond what seemed rational and trust Jesus with his hand, he had to look beyond it. So here's both the challenge and the lie that we've both faced with. See, we realize that in God, freedom is found when we give him what's in our hand. I think we know that to be true, that freedom is found when I give God what's in my hand. See, the challenge is actually we have to give it to God. That is the challenge. See, the challenge of forgiveness is that we have to give him our pain. The challenge of forgiveness is we have to give him our bitterness. We even have to sometimes give him the other person. The challenge of blessing that we want to receive is that we have to first give our first. We have to give our best, maybe those things that we work so hard for. The challenge of a divine outcome is the ability to walk in faith and obedience in step one. We have to take that first step, and this is the challenge we hold on to, realizing that freedom is found when I give away what's in my hand, and what's in my hand often seems insignificant to bring us freedom. And so that's where the enemy comes in and says, well, you don't really need to give it away. What you actually need is more. See, in life, freedom is found when we get something we don't yet possess. That's what the world wants us to tell you. You want freedom? You need to get more. You want to be financially freedom? Get more money. You want to have blessings? You need to get more. Keep more, hold more, store more. See, but it's upside down, because if I'll forgive them when they first forgive me. That's kind of our thought, right? Well, once they forgive me, then I'll forgive them. Or God, I'll start giving back to you when you prove to me you're going to take care of me. You give to me first. Or, hey, I'll take that step of faith and obedience once I see the outcome. Once you show me where you're going to take me, then I'll take a step. See, we believe that if we get X, then we'll be happy. So we exchange tomorrow's future for today's pursuit. And this is the trap that grips our heart with the spirit of discontentment. This discontentment, which robs our joy, which robs and steals our joy. See, we find the origin of this lie back in Genesis right from the very beginning. And it's still a trap that we fall into today. And it's this thought, it's this lie that plagues and holds onto our heart. And here it is. We believe rather that God is holding out on us. Now, nobody would ever say that. But we believe by holding on to, by retaining what God's put in our hand, we're believing that God actually doesn't have something better for me. So it's my responsibility to take care of me. It's my responsibility to hold on to what I have and to not let it go. I'm going to hold on to what's mine. I will find freedom when I hold on and collect more of what's mine. And we hold on to this lie. And so we pursue what we don't yet possess, believing it will bring us freedom and happiness and fulfillment. We buy into the lie, only to find out that the cumulative cost to this way, along the way, is freedom itself. That the very thing we're pursuing is the thing we're actually losing. We exchange the presence of God for the fleeting pleasure, and we believe it will bring freedom. And we hold on to what we have, believing that God is unable to bring anything better. Have you found yourself in that place before? Have you found yourself in that season where God's asking you to let something go, and everything inside of you, you're not really sure if you can, or if you do let it go, that God will actually take care of you? So you hold on to it even more tightly. We've all been there, haven't we? Listen, I'm not saying this is easy. This is hard stuff. It's one thing to say it. It's a whole other thing to live it. It's one thing to get up here and just say, hey, God, but I'm telling you, listen to me, and I'm not going to get into the story, but I'm not asking you to do something that I have not done myself. And there was a moment, a defining moment in my life where God asked me to let something go when I had nothing left to hold on to. And I'll tell you what, it's in that moment that separates whether you believe it or you actually believe it. Is it just something you know? Something you speak out because it sounds good, it's encouraging, or do you actually believe it? Because proof is in the pudding, and I'm telling you, church, there's going to come a day where as Christians we can't just say what we believe, we have to walk what we believe. The day is coming. You think it's going to get better? You think the landscape of our culture is going to go back to our favor? No. It's just going to get worse. And so as Christians, it's time to put our feet down and say what we believe and live what we believe in. It may not go our way. And guess what? The Bible says it won't go our way. But whose way are you going to go? We have to release it. So for Moses here, excuse after excuse, he's finally processing and he's evaluating his own heart. He's finding himself in this moment. And then in this moment, Moses chooses to trust God enough to let go and to go. That's a big step. It's not just affecting him, it's affecting his family. You see, Moses, he says he took his wife and he takes his sons. It's not just Moses. Moses isn't just risking his life. Moses isn't just risking his life. He's risking the life of his family. He believes in it so much so. I'm going to take my wife. I'm going to take my kids. And we're going to go back to Egypt. And then Moses took the staff. Not just the staff anymore. But what is it now? It's the staff of God. The thing that was so ordinary has now become extraordinary. The thing that you think is simple now becomes supernatural when you give it to God. He doesn't just take the staff that he found on the side of the road. He takes the staff of God in his hand, and they head back to the land of Egypt. So what does God put in your hand today? And are you willing to trust God with it, to let it go, to do what his word says, to see it transformed? First thought, guys, is what we retain in our hands reveals what's in our heart. If you want to trust God with your heart, you need to release it with your hands. Second thought, as we release what God has put in our hands, as we release what's in our hand, God releases what's in his. As we release what's in our hands, God releases what's in his. We all have something in our hands. Every one of us have something in our hands, and I'm not just talking about a cell phone. Okay, we all have something in our hands, something in our control, something in our oversight. Samson had a donkey's jawbone. Hannah had empty jars. David had a sling and a stone. The unnamed boy had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Moses had a staff. But the key of all of these situations and stories and more is that they chose to release what's in their hand, allowing God to then release what's in his. They chose to release what was in their hands, allowing God then to release what was in his. We pick up this story in Exodus 6. Follow along. It says, "But the Lord said to Moses, you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land." Picking up at verse 5. "Moreover, I have heard the groanings of the people of Israel, and whom the Egyptians hold as slaves. And I remember the covenant. I remember my covenant. Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with my outstretched hand, my outstretched arm, with great acts of judgment." See, it's this moment that starts the whole 10 plagues of Egypt. We don't have time to read through them all, but if you want to follow it, you can go in Exodus and you can read through it. But there's a simple pattern that follows here, and it's really important that we see it. It's imperative that we see this pattern if we want to see the power of God move in our life. And it's this, is that Moses first placed his staff in the water, and then God turns it to blood. Moses first speaks, and then God moves. Moses releases what's in his hand, then God releases what's in his. The natural always precedes the supernatural. Any story you see in the Bible, any move of the Spirit you see in history, it always starts with the natural act of faith and obedience, the natural act of releasing what is in mine and allowing God to release what is in his. You will never find it the other way around. If you do, let me know. I'm open to that conversation, but I guarantee you, I shouldn't guarantee you if I said, I'm pretty sure, 100% almost positive. But it's true. It's true. The natural always precedes the naturals. It's a supernatural relationship, this blended relationship. And it's the same relationship that God wants to have with you and me. This blended relationship of the natural and the supernatural working together, hand in hand, walking in faith and obedience and seeing the power of God move. David is a great example. There's so many examples, but David is a great example. It's one we all know, the story of David and Goliath. It's a great example. Was it a natural act for David to learn how to use a slingshot? It was natural. Was it a natural act for David to pick up stones from a stream? It was natural. Was it a natural action for David to swing his sling and to release a stone? That was natural. He's practiced it many times before. But it was a supernatural transaction that struck the stone so hard enough in the right spot that killed Goliath on the spot. But then it was a natural action for David to go up and finish the job by cutting off his head. There was a blended, nobody likes to tell you that part of the story, but that's pretty cool. Little 12-year-old David with a big old sword cutting off Goliath's head. That's awesome. He did other stuff too that were pretty crazy. Things we're not allowed to talk about at church. Anyway, I can't. It'll just go on a bunny trail and we're never going to get back. Okay. But David, it's this natural relationship, this supernatural relationship, this blended relationship. But it starts, here's the key, church. It starts with the natural. The natural precedes the supernatural. As we release what's in our hands, it allows God to then release what's in his. Are you with me? See, we often find ourselves looking for a move of God, but I feel so hard I feel so strongly that God is actually just looking for a move of man. We're saying, God, why won't you do something? And he's looking down saying, why don't you do something? I've given you a stick. I've given you a place. I've given you position. I've given you influence. I've given you, what are you going to do with what I've given you? Do something and I'll bless it. Take a step and see what I can do. Stop looking for God to do something for you to chase that win. No, just do something. Like, this is one of those messages. It's not like just come and soak and Lord fill. No, just go home and do something. Just do something and see what God will do. Just start. Jason says it all the time. Make your next step an obedient step. Just do something. Start and see what God will do. See, every move of the Spirit was instigated by humanity's faith and obedience in God to do the seemingly impossible. And here's the caution. The caution is we don't want to miss out on God moments. I feel we can look so hard for the supernatural that we can miss the supernatural rather by looking too intently for the spectacular. We're looking for the water to divide. We're looking for the plagues of locusts and frogs and like we're just looking for these spectacular moves of God when God is moving all the time in our midst. God is using you all the time to impact and lead people to Jesus all the time, and we've missed them. We just dismiss them as like ordinary or common. But don't miss the supernatural by looking too intently for the spectacular. I guarantee you, there's very few people in that room when Jesus turned water into wine, the very first miracle, other than the ladies who brought the water jugs, Mary and a few disciples that are around them. I don't believe anybody else in the room knew a miracle took place. Like even the master of ceremonies made a comment of saving the best wine to last. He had no idea that 5 minutes ago this was a glass of water. Or those who, when Jesus turned 5 loaves and 2 fish into like a feast for 10,000 people, I bet you those guys had no idea. They just thought, oh, here's food. They have no idea that their miracle just took place. They just ate with glad and sincere hearts. Just happy to be fed. Like God is moving all the time. And are we aware? Are we seeing it? Are we too busy looking for the spectacular moments? Are we seeing the spiritual moments as God continues to release what's in his hand? So first we need to release what's in our hand. Then God will do what he can do. So Pharaoh finally relented and agreed to let Moses' people go. And I love this. Moses, he reminds the Israelites who really saved them. Hint, it wasn't his silly stick. Right? He says to them, in chapter 13, verse 3, he says, then Moses says to the people, remember this day. Like if you have a calendar, circle it. Like whatever like a little chisel and a rock, just circle that day. Remember this day in which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for the strong hand, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out of this place. Here's the thing what needs to happen, church. When you open up your hand and you release what God has put in your hand, and then God, by faith, releases what's in his, don't take the credit. Look what I did. We do that too often. Jesus is the hero of every story. Always will be, period. Okay? We know when man takes God's place, when man takes the praise away from God, he says, look what I did. All I can say is disgusting. We all feel the same thing. Give honor where honor is due. Give praise where praise is due. When God does something through you, thank God. Thank God. And I guarantee he will just continue to do it through you. And you'll be used as a tool that transforms a city. You'll be used as a tool that's transforming a neighborhood. You'll be used as a tool if you just continue to give the praise where praise is due. Thank God. So Moses is reminding, hey guys, just remember, it wasn't me. It wasn't this silly stick of mine. It was a strong and mighty hand of God. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Remember that God? Yeah, he's still moving, and he's still working, and he has not forgotten you. Which leads to my third point. Third thought to consider is this, is the potential of what's in our hands is only made possible because of the power of his. The potential of what God has placed in your hands is only made possible because of the power of his. Along anything that we do that has any lasting or eternal influence or makes any eternal difference is only made possible because of Jesus, period, full stop. Jesus. I love Paul is writing a letter to the church of Ephesus, and he writes this, and I'm reading from the Passion Translation. It's just another great way to read Scripture with a different perspective, and I just want to read it here. It says, I pray that the light of God will illuminate the eyes of your imagination, flooding you with light until you experience the full revelation of the hope of his calling. That is the wealth of God's glorious inheritance that he finds in you and he finds in us, his holy ones. I pray that you will continually experience the immeasurable greatness of God's power made available to you through faith. Then your lives will be an advertisement, I love that, an advertisement of immense power as he works through you. This is the same mighty power that was released when God raised Christ from the dead and exalted him in the place of highest honor and supreme authority in the heavenly realms. And now he is exalted as first above every ruler, authority, and government, and realm, and power in existence. He is gloriously enthroned over every name that is ever praised, not only in this age, but in the age that is coming. He alone, say he alone. Come on, say he alone. He alone is the leader and the source of everything needed in the church. And some would say amen. God has put everything beneath the authority of Jesus Christ and has given him the highest rank above every other. And now we, his church, his body, are here on earth, that which he fills us is being filled by it. We are filled by the same power. So what he's placed in our hands is only made possible by the power of his. Today, the obedient step is to trust God with what's in our hand. The battle of the mind is to stop chasing our tail, believing that freedom is found if we just get X, Y, and Z. If I can just get that in my hand, then it'll be okay. The real truth is this, is that what's in our hand, it just pales in comparison to the strength and power of his nail-scarred hand. Whatever he's placed in our hand, as good as it may seem to us, it pales in comparison to what his nail-scarred hand. See, his nail-scarred hand, it makes the leopard clean. It makes the deaf hear. It makes the blind see. It causes the dead to rise again. His nail-scarred hands transform sinners into saints and rescues doubters like Thomas, turning them into believers. It welcomes the prodigals and it softens the self-righteous. His nail-scarred hand leaves the 99 to search after the one. His nail-scarred hand secures your today and your eternal tomorrow. It lifts you up when you fall down and catches you when you slip. His nail-scarred hand is not too short. It can reach you where you're at, and it's not limited. It can place you where you're purposed to be. His nail-scarred hand wrote the beginning from the end, and it writes your next chapter. And in this chapter you are in, his nail-scarred hand is for you. He's not against you. Though he will convict you and discipline you and correct you and change you, but out of his deepest love for you. See, his nail-scarred hand was enough for Moses. It was enough to watch over Joseph. It was enough to catch the sinking Peter. It was enough to calm a doubting Thomas. It was enough to transform a skeptic named Saul. It was enough, and it is enough, to rescue and redeem and renew and restore and one day resurrect all those who reach out in faith. Because here's the truth, and I've said it already, whatever is in your hand is enough when you are in the nail-scarred hands of Jesus. It doesn't matter. I know you're not excited. I'm okay. I'm excited. Because when I look at my limitations, I don't see my limitations. I can see the possibilities of what if. What if I just give this to God? What if I say yes when everything inside of me is screaming no? What if I take a step when I'm not sure what the next step is? What if? And the sad reality is what if I don't? What if I just see the stick as a stick and walk away from that experience and I miss completely what God wanted to do in and through me? See, freedom is found when we give what we have in our hands over to God. You see, the heart of freedom isn't just trusting Jesus within your hand. It's more than that. See, the heart of freedom is trusting his hand to do in and through you. It's something special in and through your life. When you trust his hand enough to move in and through your life. And I'm so grateful. There's so many people inside of our church family today who are continually trusting Jesus, what God has put in their hand. And they're saying yes, and they're releasing the simple, or maybe even the small things that God has given them. And they're just giving it back to God, and God is blessing it, God is using it. And we can tell story after story, and there's so many great things. But one thing I just want to celebrate on the heels of the women's conference this week is that there's men in our church also who are really going after Jesus. Guys like Sean Davis, Pastor Gabe, and JJ Brune, and Nicholas Thomas, who are saying yes to Jesus. And this weekend they're hosting a men's conference called Armor Up. They've done it for several years now. And it's just them saying, God, we don't have a lot, but what we do have, we're going to give it back to you. We're going to open up our hand, and we're going to see what you can do. As we release our hands to you, we can't wait to see what you're going to do as you release your hand with what's in your hand. And so we're excited for you, Sean. We're praying over blessing over you guys this weekend. And there's so many others. There's so many others. But what would it be like if we were as a church who won't just talk about what God can do, but we actionize and activate our faith to see what God can do through me? See, I believe that when you get Jesus in you, he can then work through you. When you allow Jesus in you, you're given the opportunity to begin to work through you. See, freedom is trusting and giving Jesus what's in your hand. Freedom is rejecting the lie that you have to go get what you don't already have to experience freedom. See, more than those things, freedom is found in embracing his nail-scarred, his loving, his true, his glorious, his risen hand of grace that he offers to each and every one of us if we just reach out and receive it. It's available to you. His hands are available to you.